Hello, my name is Ken Kramer, and I'm interviewing at the Public Library of Cincinnati in Hamilton County. Today I'm interviewing Robert Johnson on November 27th, 2006 at the Wyoming Branch Library. Our camera operator today is Diane Wright. And welcome and thank you for agreeing to do this.
Good morning.
I think this is such a wonderful opportunity to get your unique experiences that otherwise no one would know about. So I'd like to start out by just asking you to talk a little bit about your experiences, briefly what you were doing before you entered the service and how that came about and so forth.
Okay. Before the service, I started going to the University of Ohio State in 1940 and went there that first year. And then in 1941, I left, came back to live with my mother and family here in Cincinnati. And after that time, I did work for a while for Wright Aeronautical Corporation in Laughlin, where we were making the 18-cylinder radial engines.
Mm-hmm. Well, then were you drafted or you...
No, in order to prevent that, I enlisted in December, I think December the 14th, 1942, I enlisted. And in order to get my choice of service, anyone under the age of 20 was permitted to choose his own service. I chose the Air Force.
Okay. And then you had, do you want to talk about then where you went for basic training? And so forth?
Oh, that was very good. First, I went through Fort Thomas and contracted my first case of bronchitis, which I've been eligible to suffer that all the rest of my life. And so after a real cold, chilly time in Fort Thomas, I managed to get out of there on the train and go to Miami Beach in the nick of time to get into the hospital in Miami Beach with first of many different cases of bronchitis.
Okay.
And I was in the hospital for a while, and that's where the basic training was done there, and then they sent me off to Chanute Field in Illinois. Illinois was where I went to the first of two schools, as I was assigned to the weather service of the U.S. Army. In those days, the Air Force was just a part of the Army, it was not independent. And so I went to school 2 times at Chanute Field, first time to learn how to be a weather observer, and the second time later on how to be a radio sonde operator.
A what?
Radio sonde. That's one word. A radio sonde is an instrument used by all people in the weather service. It's a transmitting radio which you fasten on to a balloon filled with hydrogen, and you send it up, and with your radio directional signals and sound, you follow that broadcasting device as long as it goes until the balloon bursts.
And what kind
Coming
of...
in on your radio, you receive the temperature, pressure, and relative humidity. It all comes in on the radio, and you have a big equipment that you're working on where you're taking in this data and drawing a weather map.
Would you also get wind speed out of that too?
That's right. We got wind speed also.
Mm-hmm. And then the radio would just disappear, I guess, or...
Oh, yeah, it disappeared, but it had labeling printed on the sides in order to conserve money.
Yeah.
If anybody found it and it wasn't totally broken, they could turn it into a post office and it would be recycled for use again.
Was there any reward for that?
I don't think so, but there's great thanks from the...
In patriotism, yeah.
And in the United States, all that work was done by the civilian employees, but we were preparing to do it in foreign countries.
Okay. So then where did you go from there?
From there, let's see, after I left Chanute Field, I think there was a resting period. What you do in the service is you hurry up and wait. So I hurried up and I got through that school and they sent me down to St. Louis. I think it was called Scott Field. Waited there for 4 or 5 weeks. And after that, I was transferred again, went to North Carolina. I think it was Goldsboro, North Carolina. That was another period of waiting, and also that's where we received our overseas training.
Okay.
Do some more practice with rifles, pistols, learn how to crawl on the ground under the barbed wire and so forth. And that all took place at Goldsboro. Now when I left there, we went by train, I think we went to Newport News, Virginia, where we set sail. And I was in a convoy, approximately over 100 ships. And we sailed from the Virginia there and went across the Atlantic, went through the southern route and then through the Mediterranean. And some of my buddies were dropped off in Morocco, I think it was. And I then arrived in Ismailia, Egypt after 28 days. And that was to be my station where I was sent to work in Cairo, Egypt.
And your main job then?
That was my main job, to work at the weather station, what was called Payne Field, P-A-Y-N-E. Payne Field on the west side of Cairo. I think I was there for about 18 months.
Okay, so you're working in the weather station, and the weather station provided information to...
Our information was all transferred to the meteorologist. We take the data each day. We made maps of the weather situation 4 times a day.
Mm-hmm.
And plotted that right up to date with the weather conditions. And we delivered that to the meteorologist. He has a higher level of education than we did, and the meteorologists were the ones that made the forecast. The forecasts were what all the pilots needed to know where they're going, what it would be like, what time they should start, or when they might get back.
Okay.
So at Cairo was the main stop, and I believe it might have been, for many pilots, it was the only stop for pilots flying from the U.S. to Burma. So they would stop at Cairo for refueling, rest period, and then take off.
Was there any enemy action near where you were?
My enemy, I just had 2 attacks on the way over there. They were in the western part of the Mediterranean. And I know the date because that was the date I found out later that my grandmother died, May 14th, 1944. And we had 2 attacks in that one day. See, one attack was by a submarine, and the other attack in the time of submarine attack came around breakfast time. And the same day we had the air attack when the sun was setting. Airplanes came out of Italy, attacked our convoy. Convoy, by the way, had, believe it or not, the tankers carrying the oil were the extreme outside of the convoy. They were not inside, they were on the outside.
Do you know the reason for that?
I think the reason for it was because we had protection from our own planes, and there would be action of them fighting off the enemy, and they didn't want to be shooting at the largest number of freighters, because the convoy was largely freighters carrying all sorts of things. And my ship, I don't recall the name of it anymore, but my ship was loaded completely with Mustang fighter planes, Lend-Lease for Russia. They would get to Russia by passing through Egypt. So we had so many planes on there, the crates holding these planes filled up the whole deck. And so when you went topside, you could climb up and down over these crates of airplanes.
They were disassembled, I guess, and
Oh, yeah, they were all disassembled and packed in wooden crates.
do you have an estimate of how many were on your ship?
Really don't know.
Okay.
But due to the fact that I'd had a little bit of military training in the ROTC at Ohio State, I was well suited to be on the freighter. We had three types of crew. We had the Merchant Marine running the ship, we had the Navy doing the gunnery, and we had the Air Force's passengers. The Air Force passengers served as backups for the Navy gun operators. We have machine guns, 3-inch gun on the bow, and 5-inch gun on the stern. So 3-inch gun was where my duty was, right under the tub of such a gun. The tub was probably about 12 to 15 feet in diameter, with a wall around to protect you from small caliber fire. And when your 3-inch gun is fired, you're just like you're sitting inside of a drum. So hopefully your earplugs would help you out, but I think I still have tinnitus today to remember that.
Were you issued earplugs?
Yes, we were.
Uh-huh. And what was your job down in the tub?
My job in the tub was a fuse setter. I was a back, as I said before, all the gunnery was done by the Navy men, but each sailor had one person as his backup. If he was knocked out, then an Air Force man would take his place. So my job was fuse setter on the, I think those were 3-inch shells. And one man would be looking at the plane that we were defending against, calling out the number, distance. Another man has figured how many seconds that was. And as backup to the fuse setter, I set on the front end of the shell, I set it for how many seconds we wanted to explode.
Wow.
Delicate job.
I was going to say, was there some danger that the shell might blow up while you're working on it or setting it?
Oh, not that I know of. Made by reliable people back home.
Okay.
Yeah, because the timer didn't start until, it was fired out of the 3-inch gun. That's on the bow. And a 5-inch gun stern was for shooting towards submarines.
Okay.
And they, of course, were firing torpedoes. But the only thing they were looking for was oil tankers, because there are too many ships for them to bother much of them. And the object of the enemy was to eliminate fuel for the whole military effort.
So then in Cairo, what did you do, let's say when you weren't on duty? Or
Well, that was
how'd
interesting.
you pass the time?
We had a lot of things we could do when we would go. On a holiday like July 4th, we'd go down when the U.S. Embassy was open to all people from home, military, any branches, have a party on the lawn of a U.S. Embassy. And then when we got furloughs, which would be approximately, I think, 7 days each, I enjoyed 2 of those. Were great. The first one was I went to Rome with a couple hours stop in Greece, so I had to get to Rome, and that was interesting. They had a place way out at the military camp that was built by the infamous Mussolini.
Mm.
He built that as a training ground and so on, and the U.S. troops were provided the place to stay there. Was, well, a few miles out of the city of Rome. So as I got up there, pardon me, I think I need a little break here. As I got up to this camp, some of my buddies said, well, you'll enjoy things a lot more if you get out of this camp and go down to the city and get a room in a rooming house. So that sounds good to me. So 2 of us did, and that was a few miles to Rome. We find a place to stay in a rooming house, room for 2 men. And that way, where our shoe leather would last a little bit longer, because if you're in Rome for 7 days and there's no transportation, we did a lot of walking. So we really did see Rome pretty well. I did the same thing later on a 7-day furlough when I went to Israel. I spent most of the time in Jerusalem, made a side trip to Damascus, and enjoyed a weekend on the Sea of Galilee at the southern end, where at that time I had a very close buddy who was a Jewish fellow from New York City, a high school teacher, and I, being much younger, was glad to have a more senior person to go around with in Israel. And to top it off, he spoke Yiddish, so he could talk to the people there, and he guided us around the public transportation and all around that part of Israel, and also up to Damascus and back. It's very educational, enjoyable, even though at that age I was, young. Having enlisted in the service about 3 weeks before my 20th birthday, because after a person became 20, you lost the chance to choose your branch.
I see, yeah. While you were in Cairo, did you get news as to how the war was going? Or
Yeah, let's see, we had, I don't remember the title of that paper, but we had a weekly paper printed for all branches of military.
was it Stars and Stripes, was it?
I don't remember the title. It might have been it.
Uh-huh.
But we got all the news in there, which kept us informed. Let's see. One major event, I don't know the date, but that's about the time when FDR died, I think. I was in Egypt.
Okay,
President Truman took office.
right, yeah. How was the morale at where you were?
But the morale there was pretty good, but now you mentioned the word morale, I may be getting off the timetable, but
That's
I had
okay.
an interesting job given to me when I was getting ready to leave the country. And I suspect, since I'd previously worked for Wright Aeronautical in Laughlin, Ohio, my first job there was making cylinder head cores. The core is a form in which metal is poured when it's been melted in order to make the head of cylinders for aircraft engines. Let's see, I was heading for another.
Morale.
Oh yeah, the morale. I had worked there at Wright Aeronautical, which required that I have a security clearance. I realized later that that went with me wherever I went in the service. So whoever was reading those things decided I should be a person chosen to watch out for anything considered to be unusual, abnormal, or worth further investigation by somebody else. And so I was taught how to try to be observant, watch for anything unusual. And one of the things I thought was a little unusual was one of the other men in my group that came out of Vermont. I think he was a member of a certain political party which could pass as Democrat, but maybe I suspected might have been something else. The fellow was, shall we say, quite left-leaning
Okay.
in his actions and what he had to say. And so, having been picked for such a job, I was instructed how to make reports on any such items, put them in a letter, send them to a name and address that was given to me, and they gave me a sort of a code to write letters that would be directed to my family with, totally forget what the code was, but in there I could put down anything that was observed by me that would possibly be something worth investigating. So I sent out some of those letters from the places I was at the time, and even I sent one during or after we sailed over the Atlantic.
So, did that have something to do with morale?
Oh, yeah, we were on the subject of morale. And morale, morale was excellent where I was because there was a lot of interesting things you could do in your spare time.
Mm-hmm.
Dirty work was done for us by the local people, and I'd say, well, dirty work includes hard work. Because when you're running a weather station, you're either generating your own hydrogen or you're getting it in these large tanks that are seen around hospitals and so forth. Mm-hmm. And since we'd sent up our weather balloons from the roof of a building we were in on the airport, we have these cylinders out, and they must have weighed 70 to 100 and some pounds. And so we have a local employee to put that on his shoulder and go up the steps and put it up on the roof of our building from where we fill our weather balloon is filled up until it's about 4 feet in diameter and carries up the radio sound instrument as long as the balloon gets larger and larger up until it bursts. Then the transmitting radio and the instruments on there come back down to Earth on a parachute. If it's in the U.S., it might make its way back to the Weather Bureau.
Right.
But when it's in Egypt, you never see it again.
Yeah,
Because people couldn't read the English on there anyway.
Use lots of radios there.
Yeah, right.
So morale was good since.
Yeah, the morale was good because we were in an interesting place.
Right.
We could take a streetcar ride for the equivalent of, let's see, about 7 cents worth of our money. Or buy a trip on the streetcar going about 7 miles, I guess, from Heliopolis down to the center of Cairo. And down there you could go around the city, visit here and there, visit the U.S. Embassy.
Did you have much interaction with local people there? And were you well received?
At the time, yeah, we were well received by the local people. However, there's a language barrier there because of they're speaking Arabic, and I have one buddy in my group who grew up in Louisiana whose last name was Mohammed. Mm-hmm. And all those people thought he was Arabic. Mm-hmm. Well, he looked a little bit that way, but I don't think he spoke Arabic anyway.
So from Cairo then, I noticed you indicated you went on to Iran?
That's right. Let's see. After working in Cairo for some months, yeah, the war was coming towards success. And so the people that were getting out were able to go back home were going back on what was called the point system. Mm-hmm. And the point system gave so many points for your background, your training, how many months you've been in service. And so I was at the point where I was what you'd call a low point person, mm-hmm. not a high point person. And so it was evident that I was, even though we were winning the war, and the war was, I think it was already over, it would be a long time before I would get home. And so by passing the word around, we heard that due to the fact we had a strange political situation in Iran, Great Britain, the United States, and Russia all were permitted to come with military people and have bases in Iran. Each of the 3 countries has signed the agreement that by January the 1st, after defeat of Hitler, they would all vacate. The 3 countries agreed to do that. 2 of them kept the agreement. One of them didn't. Obviously, we know who that was. And for this reason, I wanted to get home sooner, and I found out that since we were vacating any bases that we had in Iran, in order to solve the problem for a short time, while a substitute base was being built on Bahrain Island in the Persian Gulf, TWA was employed on a temporary basis to operate an airport at Abadan, Iran, which I volunteered to work at that airport for 6 months, because from my calculating, I'd get home sooner. Actually, it worked fine because they got out of there in 3 months. But by doing that, I was discharged from the military service in Cairo, and I took a job with TWA. I flew up to Abadan and the airport there. We did the same thing there that I've been doing in Cairo.
Mm-hmm.
Got finished 3 months instead of 6 months. I was a civilian that got rid of all my uniforms and invested in regular clothes, just like a citizen. And some of my buddies were doing the same thing up in Yugoslavia, running weather stations, also Istanbul, various points there in the Middle East. And so I was able to get back home as a civilian.
Great.
I expected, of course, to get back. Since I worked for TWA, I expected to fly home, and how innocently wrong we were. All of us went home the same way we got over there, on a freighter. That was extremely interesting, because when we sailed out of Alexandria, Egypt, on our way for the States, we went to Morocco first. In Morocco, we had this group of 70 or 80 men that were all civilians, traveling as, quote, passengers on a freighter, doing our share of head duty and KP duty. And so when we got to Morocco, we were feeling kind of proud of ourselves, and we weren't too happy about having to do these mundane chores on a ship. So some of us decided we're not going to stand for that. And the captain in charge of the ship wrote a list of rules that we civilians had to follow as passengers on his ship. We had to do the same chores as the military that were all in the same freighter, and they were on their way home. The men with low points were being moved to Le Havre, France. The ones with high points were able to go back home. So we wouldn't sign the paper treating ourselves as military because we were civilians. When the captain heard about that, he sailed and left us there. That's how we happened to come on a different ship, the second ship. We were busy filing complaints with the American legation and trying to contact the embassy where nobody was available. That was kind of humorous. So we wound up on a different ship. Instead of sailing for the States, it went to Le Havre, France. So it took us longer to get home than normal. And Le Havre, well, we being civilians, of course, had passports. And for any country to enter, we had to have also a visa. And we had a visa for Egypt, we had one for Iran, we had one for Morocco, but we didn't have any for France. They didn't know we were going to be in France. So when our ship went to Le Havre, we just cooled our heels down the docks, and for I think 2 or 3 days, I sent a cablegram home to my mother. I'm on the way, Mom. And from there, then we sailed to port in New Jersey, right near New York. Went through one of the worst North Atlantic storms anybody ever experienced. When that freighter would be like this, tilted up. A wave goes by and the bow of the ship drops like a rock and hits the ocean with a tremendous bang. And then the stern does the same thing when the wave goes by. The stern comes up out of the water, and the props go so much faster in the air, and the whole stern of the ship is shaky. You think the ship's falling apart, but it's not. We made it all the way to New Jersey.
Didn't get seasick?
No, oh no, I didn't. I'm very fortunate that didn't affect me, but most of my buddies, we put it in words, many of them never saw the sky. And something else they never saw, I think it was the mess hall, while they're on this long trip home. Well, I was just fortunate, it didn't bother me. But ride a roller coaster at Coney Island, I wouldn't do it.
You want to talk a little bit about the medals you received?
Let's see, if I can remember, my motion.
Victory Medal, the
Victory Medal.
E-name ribbon?
Yeah, that's the Europe and Middle East ribbon. And there's the American campaign, and then there's the Middle East campaign. I enjoyed those. I have two real young grandsons. I gave two of them to one in Indianapolis and gave two to the other one.
And a good conduct medal.
A good, yeah, good conduct. That's not really much. Means you never wound up in the brig.
So then, getting back into civilian life.
Oh yes, back to civilian life. Oh, so a lucky day. I was able to go back to Ohio State University in summer of 1946 and resume my school there in order to graduate. So here I started in Ohio State as a freshman in 1940 and I managed to graduate in March 1949, which seems like a long time. But in addition to all that time in the military service, I worked two different jobs for Wright Aeronautical and worked another job for TWA, so there was a lot going on other than just the 3 years in military.
So when did you meet your wife?
Oh, fascinating time. I met my wife when we were introduced by my brother's girlfriend, and that was down here in North College Hill, near a part of Cincinnati suburb, when we were introduced by my brother, and that occurred in 1946.
So after you got back?
After I got back.
Yeah.
Didn't meet her until then.
Okay. And so I understand you have 3 kids?
Well, got 3 children. Son David is an MD. He lives in Centerville, Ohio, and our twin daughters. Kathleen is in Indianapolis. She's an attorney. And our twin sister is a math teacher, and her other major occupation was being a counselor. Mm-hmm. She was a counselor both at Miami University and then later in Purdue, where she got her master's degree.
In your career then?
My career was started up in the right field after I finally graduated from Ohio State in '49. And my first job was I had a bachelor's degree in chemistry. Mm-hmm. I worked for a man named Willard Upson, who was an engineer, chemical engineer and consultant in Cincinnati that did work for, he was an entrepreneur that got more work than he can handle, so he had 2 assistants working for him. I was one of the 2. And we did a lot of analytical work with testing items for various clients of his. Couldn't handle all the work for themselves. And that's what caused me to wind up working for the Hilton Davis Chemical Company.
Okay.
Because I handled their work with my boss, Willard Upson, and they wanted fast results. So I'd get on the telephone we didn't mail them over. Hilton Davis was operating on Langdon Farm Road, near the Cincinnati Garden. So I would be running a lot of analytical work, phoning the results to various people in their factory on a daily basis. That resulted in my finally taking a job with them.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything just in general about your military experience that you think we haven't covered that you want people to know about? Or
Well, the fact that I had these two wonderful furloughs. We mentioned the first one went to Rome. The second
Israel.
furlough went to Israel. At that time it was Palestine. This is before Israel was existing. And that was very enjoyable because I had friends that were also running weather stations up there. And some of them said, I'll get you a date. So got a date with a lovely local resident there. And since she was Jewish and we weren't, well, we'd come and go on a date. We had to stay in the back alley because if the older folks around there saw this lovely young Jewish girl out with this American who was apparently not Jewish, they would probably put her in the brig. So we went up and down the alleys on these dates. Then while I was there on that particular furlough, I was so happy to get to make a side trip to Damascus. And I walked on a street called Straight where the Apostle Paul had walked. And of course, when I was in Jerusalem, I walked where Jesus walked. At least I was about 20 feet higher up than he was, but it was the same route going up the Via Dolorosa. So these things were really fascinating for a young fellow like myself. And then, since my college buddy, my weather service bureau buddy from New York City, he was 5 or 6 years older. He was a high school teacher. And since he spoke Yiddish, he arranged for us to visit a kibbutz on the southern shore of Galilee. And we were able to spend several days there, treated royally. And many of these in the kibbutz, several of these people had come from New York City. They decided they'd move permanently and live in Palestine. So at this place where we stayed, we were treated royally. They had their own school. Everybody had a job, including all the wives had jobs and the husbands had jobs. The kibbutz packaged up jams and jellies, which was their source of income. They sold these to the British Army. And we had a very interesting time there. In the evening after dinner, the number one dessert they had was sour cream. So that was an enjoyable time there.
Did that pretty well cover your story?
I think so, except for, well, I think as I already mentioned, we had this great storm in the North Atlantic one coming over.
Back, yeah, that was your welcoming home.
So that,
President.
well, being from Cincinnati and coming as a civilian, not like most of the military, because the only hotel I ever heard of was Taft Hotel, being a Cincinnati area resident. So my buddy from Louisiana and I were visiting New York, never having been there before, either one of us. We got on the phone, we called up to get a room reservation in the Taft Hotel. Oh, sorry, we're full. So we stayed in the YMCA in Newark, New Jersey. We went to New York by ferry. And this was amazing because one of the places we're going to go to is go up to the, Empire State Building. we're up on the observation deck of the Empire State Building, my buddy and I. Around the corner comes Dick Falk of Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, with his wife. He's a Catholic boy that married the Jewish girl in Israel, and his family disowned him. So here, he was a buddy of mine that were working in the Middle East, and we bump into him on around the 80th floor of the Empire State Building. That was a coincidence to end off.
Oh, my God.
Isn't that one?
Yeah.
So after my 5 or 6 days there, my mother was waiting for me to get home, so my buddy went to Louisiana, and I got trained for Cincinnati. She was glad to see me because, although I didn't mention it, I lost my dad when I was 12 years old. He had heart trouble for 2 years. When he died, my brother was 6, and that's when our mother and we 2 boys left almost heaven, West Virginia, and moved to Madisonville, part of Cincinnati, because this is where my mother...
And how old were you then?
At that point, when we moved to Madisonville, I was 12, and my brother was 6.
It must have been pretty rough on your mother.
Was, yes.
Yeah.
She was an only child,
Mm-hmm.
and my dad had 1 brother. Yeah.
Well, I really want to thank you again for coming and being willing to tell your story. It's really fascinating. But I also want to thank you for the contribution you made to keeping our country, making it what it is, and keeping it safe. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for that.
But we knew we had a duty to do, and that was a terrible thing when Pearl Harbor occurred. So it's a matter of enlisting to get your choice of service and speed things up a little bit and get started. Because everybody had to pitch in.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Thanks again.
Those that didn't know about it, such as our children, can do well by going down to our museum center. There's a fine exhibit down there about how did the war affect Cincinnati.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
I recommend that. Thank you.